In the spring of 1968, a Soviet nuclear submarine, the K-129, vanished into the crushing depths of the Pacific Ocean. The Kremlin was blind, unable to find their lost pride. But while the Soviets gave up, the CIA was just getting started. What followed was perhaps the most audacious and expensive covert operation in the history of the Cold War. Using a legendary billionaire as a front and a massive custom-built ship as a disguise, the United States attempted to pull off a $4 billion heist from 3 miles under the sea. Today, we open the declassified files of Project Azorian. We reveal the mechanical monsters, the high-stakes lies, and the moment a secret mission nearly sparked World War III. This isn't just a salvage operation. It's the greatest spy story never told, until now. The year was 1968, a time when the world was a powder keg of nuclear tension. In February, the Soviet Pacific Fleet submarine K-129 slipped out of the port of Petropavlovsk on a routine but deadly patrol. Carrying 3 ballistic missiles armed with 1 megaton nuclear warheads, it was a silent predator capable of wiping out several American cities in a single strike. But as the sub crossed the international date line, something went catastrophically wrong. The K-129 missed its scheduled radio check-ins. By early March, the Soviet Navy realized their nightmare had come true. A nuclear sub was missing in the vast emptiness of the North Pacific. For the next 2 months, the Soviet Navy launched one of the largest search and rescue operations in history. Dozens of ships and aircraft crisscrossed the ocean, dropping sonar buoys and scanning the waves. But they were looking in the wrong place. The Pacific is vast, and the silence of the deep is unforgiving. Eventually, the Soviets declared the K-129 and its crew of 98 men lost, abandoned to the depths. They retreated, believing their secrets, their code books, their encryption machines, and their nuclear technology were safe at the bottom of a 5-mile-deep abyss where no human could ever reach them. But they had underestimated the technological reach of the United States. While the Soviet fleet was searching blindly, the U.S. Navy's SOSUS, the Sound Surveillance System, had captured a very specific sound. It was an acoustic event, a sharp bang followed by a collapse, recorded by underwater microphones thousands of miles away. By triangulating these signals, the American intelligence community knew exactly where the K-129 had met its end. They didn't just have a general area, they had a set of coordinates. To the CIA, this wasn't just a tragedy, it was an unprecedented intelligence opportunity. If they could reach that hull, they could possess the very heart of the Soviet nuclear machine. But the technical challenge was so immense, it bordered on science fiction. The submarine wasn't just deep, it was resting 16,500 feet down, a place where the pressure is enough to crush a man like an aluminum can.
The challenge facing the CIA was staggering. They needed to build a ship nearly 600 feet long, equipped with a heavy lift system capable of pulling 2,000 tons from the ocean floor. If the Soviets saw the U.S. government building a salvage ship of that scale, they would immediately realize their lost submarine was the target. To pull this off, the CIA needed a cover story so audacious and so expensive that no one would question it. They needed a frontman with enough wealth and ego to make a crazy project look like a private business venture. They chose Howard Hughes. At the time, Hughes was the world's most famous reclusive billionaire. He was known for his eccentricities, his obsession with technology, and his massive wealth. The CIA approached Hughes with a proposal. He would announce that his company, Summa Corporation, was entering the field of deep-sea mining. The story was that the ocean floor was littered with manganese nodules, small potato-sized rocks rich in valuable minerals like nickel, cobalt, and copper. Hughes would build a specialized ship, the Hughes Glomar Explorer, to harvest these nodules. To the public and the media, it made perfect sense. It was exactly the kind of high-stakes, futuristic project an aging, secretive billionaire like Howard Hughes would undertake. While the engineers at Global Marine Inc. began designing the ship, they were actually working under strict CIA supervision. Every person involved in the project had to undergo intense security clearances. The manganese nodules were real, and the ship was real, but the mining equipment was just a mask for a massive secret claw designed to grab a broken Soviet submarine. The cost was astronomical, nearly $350 million in 1970s dollars, which would be nearly $2 billion today. It was a gamble of epic proportions. If the mission failed, the U.S. government would be caught red-handed stealing Soviet nuclear secrets. Construction of the Hughes Glomar Explorer began at the Sun Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in Pennsylvania. It was a marvel of 1970s engineering, unlike anything the world had ever seen. The ship featured a massive derrick in the center, similar to an oil rig, but its true secrets were hidden beneath the waterline. Inside the hull was a giant hollow bay known as the Moon Pool. This was a secret docking area with doors on the bottom of the ship that could open to let equipment in and out without anyone on the surface seeing what was happening. But the most critical piece of the puzzle was the capture vehicle, nicknamed Clementine. This was a massive 8-legged steel claw designed to descend 3 miles down and hug the hull of the K-129. Clementine was equipped with cameras, sonar, and powerful lights, but its most important feature was its strength. It had to withstand the incredible pressures of the deep while gripping a massive, rusted, and potentially unstable piece of machinery. To lower the claw, the Glomar Explorer used a revolutionary pipe string system. Instead of using cables, which would stretch and snap, they used sections of heavy steel pipe screwed together one by one to create a solid line reaching all the way to the bottom. To maintain its position exactly over the submarine, the ship used the first-ever dynamic positioning system. Using satellite navigation and powerful thrusters, the Glomar Explorer could stay within a few feet of its target despite the shifting currents of the North Pacific. For the engineers working on the project, it was like trying to lower a set of keys on a string from the top of the Empire State Building and trying to pick up a specific coin on the sidewalk while a gale force wind was blowing. The technical audacity was breathtaking. But as the ship finally set sail for the target coordinates in 1974, a new fear emerged. The Soviets were starting to get suspicious. In July 1974, the Hughes Glomar Explorer arrived at the coordinates, roughly 1,500 miles northwest of Hawaii. To any observer, it looked like a massive mining operation, but the CIA's biggest fear was realized almost immediately. The Soviets were watching. A Soviet naval tugboat, the Chazma, was already in the area, and later a sophisticated Soviet missile-range instrumentation ship joined the vigil. For days, the Soviet vessels circled the Glomar Explorer, sometimes coming within a few hundred yards. Soviet sailors stood on their decks with binoculars, staring at the strange American ship with its towering derrick and massive hull. The tension on board the Glomar Explorer was unbearable. The Americans had to maintain their cover at all costs. To keep up the charade of deep-sea mining, they actually deployed some of their fake mining equipment and had crews work on deck in plain sight. They even practiced radio silence regarding their true mission, communicating only via secure, encrypted channels. At one point, a Soviet helicopter flew directly over the Glomar Explorer's deck, its cameras clicking away.
The CIA agents on board held their breath. If the Soviets saw the moon pool doors open or caught a glimpse of the Clementine claw, the mission would be over, and a diplomatic nightmare would begin. Despite the harassment, the American captain stayed his course. The Glomar Explorer used its thrusters to fight the Pacific swells, staying pinned to the exact spot where the K-129 lay 3 miles below. The Soviets, apparently convinced that the Americans were truly just eccentric miners looking for rocks, eventually moved off to a distance, though they never fully left the area. With the audience watching from the horizon, the order was given: open the moon pool. The massive steel gates at the bottom of the ship slid open, and the descent into the abyss began. It was a moment of no return. The process of lowering the Clementine claw was a slow, agonizing mechanical ballet. Each section of the heavy steel pipe was 60 feet long. One by one, they were hoisted into the derrick, screwed into the pipe string, and lowered into the dark water of the moon pool. It took days of continuous work. As the pipe string grew longer, it became a massive, vibrating pendulum, subjected to incredible stresses from the ship's movement and the deep ocean currents. 3 miles of steel pipe weighs millions of pounds. The sheer physics of keeping it from snapping under its own weight was pushing 1970s technology to its absolute limit. Inside the Glomar Explorer's control room, engineers watched flickering monitors connected to cameras on the claw. For hours, there was nothing but the snow of the deep-sea abyss, a phenomenon known as marine snow, which is organic debris drifting down through the water column. But then, through the darkness, a shape began to emerge. It was the K-129. The submarine looked like a ghost ship, its black hull partially buried in the silt, rusted and broken from the internal explosions and the crushing pressure of its final dive. The sight was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. This was a grave for 98 Soviet sailors, and it was also a treasure chest of nuclear secrets. The Clementine claw, guided by its thrusters, hovered just feet above the target. The mechanical fingers of the claw were opened wide. The engineers on the surface, thousands of feet above, manipulated their controls with the precision of surgeons. Finally, the word was given: contact. The claw descended onto the hull of the K-129, its steel arms wrapping around the shattered midsection of the submarine. On the monitors, the engineers saw the silt billow up in a massive cloud as the claw took hold. They had it. But as they began the slow process of winching the prize back to the surface, the ocean had one final, devastating surprise in store. The ascent was even slower than the descent. For hours, the massive winches of the Glomar Explorer groaned under the weight of the pipe string and the 2,000-ton section of the K-129. Everything was going according to plan until the submarine reached a depth of about 9,000 feet. Suddenly, a violent shudder ran through the entire ship. Deep below the surface, a massive mechanical bang echoed through the hull of the Glomar Explorer. One of the steel arms of the Clementine claw had snapped under the incredible tension. The failure was catastrophic. As the arm gave way, the structural integrity of the entire claw was compromised. The midsection of the Soviet submarine, the part containing the coveted missile tubes, the code room, and the encryption machines, began to break apart. In a matter of seconds, 2/3 of the K-129 slipped out of the claw's grip and plunged back into the abyss. The engineers watched in horror on their monitors as the most valuable parts of their prize disappeared into the darkness, crashing back down to the ocean floor 3 miles below. The crew was devastated. Years of planning and billions of dollars had literally slipped through their fingers. However, the claw still held on to the forward section of the submarine, the bow. Fearing that the rest of the ship might collapse or that the Soviets might return with more aggressive intent, the CIA decided to continue the lift with whatever they had left. The remaining fragment of the K-129 was slowly pulled into the moon pool, and the massive steel gates were slammed shut. The world's most expensive salvage operation had resulted in only a fraction of the intended haul, but what was inside that bow would lead to one of the most solemn moments of the Cold War.
When the CIA officers finally entered the recovered section of the K-129 inside the moon pool, they were met with a grim scene. The bow was a twisted mass of steel, silt, and sea life. But among the wreckage, they found the remains of 6 Soviet sailors. Despite the fierce rivalry of the Cold War, the Americans chose to act with a level of respect that remains one of the most remarkable footnotes of the era. In September 1974, as the Glomar Explorer began its journey back to port, a formal burial at sea was conducted on the deck. The bodies of the Soviet sailors were placed in metal caskets, draped in the Soviet flag. Because the mission was still top secret, the ceremony was filmed, but the footage was locked away for decades. A CIA officer who spoke Russian performed the service, and the ship's crew stood at attention. They played the Soviet national anthem and conducted the burial with full military honors. It was a strange, silent moment in the middle of the Pacific, American spies honoring their fallen enemies in the dead of night. For the CIA, this wasn't just about protocol, it was a gesture of mariners' respect for those who had died in the unforgiving deep. When the caskets were slid into the water, it marked the end of the K-129's journey. Decades later, when the Cold War ended, the CIA gave the film of this ceremony to the Russian government as a gesture of goodwill, a move that provided the only closure many of the sailors' families would ever receive.
The CIA had planned a second mission, Project Matador, to go back and recover the rest of the submarine. But before they could return to the Pacific, the secret began to unravel. In early 1975, a group of burglars broke into Howard Hughes' offices in Los Angeles and stole documents that linked the Glomar Explorer to the CIA. Soon, legendary journalist Seymour Hersh of the New York Times got wind of the story. Despite personal pleas from CIA Director William Colby to keep the story quiet for national security reasons, the secret was out. On March 18, 1975, the Los Angeles Times broke the story wide open. The world was stunned. The deep-sea mining project was revealed as a massive $4 billion intelligence heist. The Soviets were humiliated and furious, realizing they had been watched while the Americans literally picked through their trash at the bottom of the ocean. But the most lasting legacy of the leak wasn't just the diplomatic scandal. It was a new piece of American legal language. When journalists began filing Freedom of Information Act requests for more details, the CIA came up with a unique way to protect their secrets without lying. They replied that they could neither confirm nor deny the existence of the records. This became known as the Glomar response. Today, it is a standard phrase used by government agencies around the world, but it was born out of the desperate need to hide the details of a broken submarine and a mechanical claw. The mission was over, the secret was out, and the Glomar Explorer would never return to the deep. Was Project Azorian a success? The debate continues to this day. On one hand, the CIA failed to recover the nuclear missiles or the codebooks they so desperately wanted. In terms of hard intelligence, the haul was limited. On the other hand, the project was an engineering miracle. The U.S. had proven that it could build a ship capable of performing complex mechanical work at depths previously thought impossible. It sent a terrifying message to the Kremlin. No matter where you hide your secrets, even at the bottom of the world's deepest oceans, the United States can find them. The Hughes Glomar Explorer itself had a long and varied second life. After the secret was revealed, it was eventually converted into a deep-sea oil drilling ship, working in the Gulf of Mexico for decades before finally being sold for scrap in 2015. But for those who served on her during those tense months in 1974, she was always more than just a ship. She was a testament to the era of the Cold War, a time when no price was too high and no plan was too crazy in the pursuit of an edge over the enemy. As we look back at the declassified files of Project Azorian, we see a story of incredible ambition, tragic failure, and ultimate respect. It was the $4 billion heist that changed the way the world looked at the ocean floor. The K-129 still lies in the North Pacific, a silent tomb for its crew, but the story of the mechanical monster that came for it remains one of the most daring chapters in the history of human exploration and espionage.